begin sharing my presentation. Awesome. So the title of this workshop is Can't Find Home Care, Why a Case for Fair Pay in New York State. Well, for one, there's just not enough home care workers. And for those of us on the front lines, we see this every single day. I'm just gonna move this thing. Okay. In New York State, annually, we need an average of about 27,000 new aides just to keep up with the growing demand, and almost 72,000 just to replace the aides that leave. So as you could see, that's an astronomical number, right? And a 2008 study shared that 40 to 60% of home care workers leave after less than 1 year, and 80 to 90 leave within the first 2 years. So as you could see, something is not okay, right, with these numbers, that this should not be what is happening. And you'll see even more dire as we continue. Okay, but we're gonna ask, why are they leaving, right? And I just wanted to add this quote from one of the research studies that I was reading. And it's not my opinion, but I think it encompasses the perception of home care workers in society. And it is, aides are the stepchild of healthcare, right? They are part of the healthcare infrastructure, but I think that there's a lack of recognition and respect for their role in the infrastructure of that system. And in New York State, 45% live in or near the poverty line, and 51% rely on public assistance. And in New York City specifically, 1 in 7 low-wage workers is a home care worker. And of course, with all this in mind, we're probably thinking, how does this impact the industry, right? And a 2004 report shared that turnover specifically can cost from $951 to $5,276 per employee. And basically adjusting that for inflation in 2020 dollars, which that doesn't even encompass the current inflation that we're experiencing now, that can be on average almost $4,000 per employee every time they leave. So just the idea of them leaving has its own cost associated for the MLTCs and the home care agencies. Of course, we all know this is a big deal because we need the care, right? And 2/3 of people 65 plus will need some form of long-term care at some point in their lives. And according to Caring Across Generations study, over 90% of aging New Yorkers would prefer in-home-based care as opposed to institutional care. But unfortunately, in 2019, 20% of positions in the field were unfilled, and 25% of patients reported inability to find home care. And again, as you would imagine, this is before COVID, right? So we'll get there as well. And in New York City, there's going to be a projected growth of 41% by 2040. Do I have the presenter view? Yes, and actually I learned this statistic earlier today from a Center for an Urban Future report in 2019. There are actually more 65 plus residents in New York State than the entire population of 21 states. And as we know, long-term care is expensive. Basically, Medicaid reimbursement rates always result in a shortfall. So the shortfall is about $65 per resident per day. And according to this report by the state senators, Rachel May, Gustavo, and Jessica Ramos, compounded, this adds up to about $1.5 billion shortfall for the state. And again, this is without the 2020 inflation that's been happening, right? Because this report was done maybe a year or two ago. So this number is probably higher than what that is, and it's already extremely large, right? But then, of course, some of us are probably thinking, but what about caregivers, right? They play a large role in this and are generally unpaid, right? But they come with their own costs, right? 10% of family caregivers leave the workforce to provide some care in their career. So as you see, then they're not contributing to the economy if they're leaving their jobs to have to do caregiving, right? But the other problem is that this caregiving generation, which for many of you that are familiar with the term, is called the sandwich generation, which is basically the ones that are caring for their younger children as well as their aging parents, right? But this cohort is shrinking. And I won't read this whole statement, but basically for every 7 middle-aged working adults, did I read that wrong? No. It went from every 7 middle-aged working adults to 1 person needing care to now 4 to 1. So the extent is changing a lot. And basically it says here, the supply of paid home care aides will grow by 6%, while the population 65 plus will increase by 50%. So we're just not keeping up with the demand at this point. And as I mentioned earlier, COVID made this all worse. In an October 2020 survey, 85% of participating New York State home care agencies reported staff shortages, as we all knew on the front lines, right? As a result, 76% of agencies were forced to delay or deny referrals in 2020. And I also just wanted to go into our friends ISEP, which often gets left out of the larger conversation because they, the largest portion of home care expenditures come from Medicaid. So ISEP often gets left out of the equation. But basically, as of February 2021, almost 3,000 older New Yorkers were on waiting lists for ISEP care. And this report estimated that we would need between 700 and 1,000 new home care workers to meet that demand, specifically in the ISEP program. And for those of you that are not familiar, ISEP is the expanded in-home services program for the elderly, which basically can get the people that serve people in the gray area that are not necessarily eligible for Medicaid, but also need some kind of care. And they ideally are not those that need an extended amount of care. Otherwise, they would need Medicaid, right? Because Medicaid is able to pay for or can pay for more than the amount that ISEP pays. ISEP is, I believe, a maximum of 20 hours a week. But what is actually the fair pay, right? So for the purposes of this presentation, we are going to be talking about the New York State Fair Pay for Home Care bill, which in that bill would raise home care wages 150% of the regional minimum wage. So that meaning New York City would be different than Long Island and upstate, right? I believe if you calculated it for New York City, it would be about 22 or 23 an hour, which, as you would imagine, it's not asking for the moon and the stars for this population, especially with the inflation that's happening. I think that it's pretty reasonable for the ask, right? But of course, everyone wants to know, where's the money, right? How are we going to get there? How are we going to afford this? And I just want to share that we can afford this, and in fact, it would be beneficial to the economy. And so the statistics I'm going to share are from a report released from CUNY in 2021. And basically raising the minimum wage to what it would be for the bill would reduce the turnover by 31% and save 151 million per year, and projected to fill 20,000 direct care jobs and create 18,000 additional jobs through increased economic activity, right? Because earlier we discussed caregiving and how them leaving the workforce, now they're not able to contribute to the economy. So again, you know, it's not just about the home care workers, but it's about this entire social infrastructure, right? And I think that that's something that, for better or for worse, became more understood during COVID, that each piece of the healthcare infrastructure is part of the larger network, right? And that it impacts and reverberates throughout the system, as well as with the newer concept of, I'm blanking on the term, but socioeconomic determinants of health. It also goes hand in hand with that as well. And with these job creations, it's expected that we would generate 5.4 billion for the state's economy. And I also just wanted to share that NYSOFA has an incentive to support this, because their mission, and I got this from the New York State Office for the Aging monitoring of select programs, their mission is to help New Yorkers and do advocacy for cost-effective policies. So as you could see, this is a cost-effective policy because it would generate money for the state's economy. And for those of you that are social workers, we as social workers have also an incentive to support this, right? Social workers should engage in social and political action that seeks to ensure that all people have equal access to resources, services, opportunities to meet basic human needs. And as you would imagine, having home care when needed is a basic human need, right? And I'm sure time and time again, people see, unfortunately, community members who would be able to be in the community with home care being essentially forced into institutional care because of the lack of home care options. And I wanted to share why what we have now is not fair pay. So for those of you that may not have heard, because there were a lot of things going on in the budget, but the latest budget, the governor proposed a $3 raise over a 2-year period. It would be split in two. So I believe in October, and I can check that. Yes, in October, it would be a $2 increase. And then the October of the following year would be another $1 increase. The problem with that is that it's unclear at this time how or where the money is going to be coming from. And one of the concerns, right, for the MLTCs and the home care agencies, which is a reasonable and understandable concern, right, is that they will be left with the burden of paying for these increases, and they already are struggling and living on, you know, slim margins, right? So the bill, the Fair Pay for Home Care bill, has a stipulation in there that basically the money would come from the Medicaid reimbursement rates, essentially the government, right? So the burden of these increases would not fall on the agencies or the MLTCs. And at this time, with what the governor proposed, it's pretty unclear about how that's going to play out, as well as considering it wasn't the ask from the bill, it was the $3 raise. It's unclear how this $3 raise will play out. There are concerns that it may not be enough to get over the benefits cliff. So, it may have an adverse impact. We're going to have to monitor that and see. There's also a concern that home care workers may begin reducing their hours instead of increasing their hours because they may be concerned they're going to lose their benefits. It's a really, tricky game that we have in this country with, you know, making more but then losing your benefits, and will you result in a shortfall? So there are a lot of concerns with this at this time. We're gonna have to see how it plays out. The other thing to just mention is that the raises are indexed to the minimum wage. That meaning that if the minimum wage increases, the $3 will increase with that. So I guess that is good, but again, we'll have to see how this sort of plays out, and as well keep an eye on how the money trickle is happening, because also a concern is that the burden will lie on the home care agencies, which are already struggling. And I just wanted to share this, so I'm going to open up this and show you a little bit. Okay, so I'll open this new one. Yeah, so just to show how complex, because I even tried to sit there on my own time and calculate the raises and look up the SNAP eligibility and, look at how much taxes they're going to take and not. And it was nearly impossible to try to sit there and calculate how this is all going to play out, especially because there's so many unknowns, right? Just because you're eligible for SNAP doesn't mean you're going to get a certain amount, right? There's a calculation for expenses and other things. So it's very difficult to sit there and try to calculate this yourself. Luckily, there are people that are skilled, much more skilled than I am, and able to do this. So I just wanted to share this, which was a study done, I believe, in January 2022. And as you can see, there's certain figures here. And I would assume that this is the best figure, this orange one right here, where it says families keep at least their full earnings and may receive additional tax credits. And this is when they earn 2,300 or more. And the other concern as well with home care workers that I didn't mention earlier is many also lack health insurance. So that is also a concern, that if they're making too much, they may lose their Medicaid benefit and now have to pay for health care. The other issue is because of the way home care works and the scheduling, many don't work full time. It's often difficult to even get the hours that they would like or need. So that's also another challenge, right? Because you could be working full time one week and working part time the next week, and it's just a really jumbled situation. But if you see in this chart, there are quite a few that are right below the poverty level that seem to keep their money, but then if they earn and a lot. The reason is because it is a difficult
Oh, hello, everyone. It looks as though
Am I
Joy should
back?
be good now. Yeah, you're back now. Okay, awesome.
Okay. Where did I get chopped out?
I'm not entirely sure. I was actually helping someone else out with something.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
You were at the chart.
Yeah. So basically you could see, you know, that while it's increased, that more people are able to keep what their earnings are. Oh, and I was talking about the current budget. Yeah, so I'm not sure if all of these complexities were considered when doing the budget, which obviously, as you see, it really takes somebody who's skilled in this kind of analytic type of stuff to really examine, you know, is it too little of an increase that it's going to have an adverse impact, or is it enough where it goes above the benefits cliff? It's really a chess game. It's really complex, and you're welcome to look it up. This research study. And I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Are people seeing the same page I am?
No, we don't see anything.
No? Oh, that's good.
No.
We love technology here.
We're seeing you, Joseph.
Okay.
Okay, we see it now.
I don't think it's doing that from current slide. Let's see. Ooh, 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 ooh. Nope. Here we go. Okay, now we see it, right? What can
Yes.
we do, slide? Okay, good. So of course, what can we do as now informed and educated community members, providers, social workers, any other profession working with older adults? One, I would say encourage older community members and clients to join the advocacy program. We are a small advocacy program, which in many ways is good because it can be hands-on. At this time, we're on a little hiatus for the summer because our program is primarily run by our Soberman social work community organizing intern, who obviously finished the internship. So we depend on the the social work intern for that program. But again, the good thing is that it is very hands-on, and we have many clients that appreciate that ability to support them in that way. We usually help clients call their legislators, help them write letters, you know, really give them the support that they may need to advocate and use their own voice. Many of our clients that are engaged are homebound older adults. And I think that that's also something that makes our program much more unique than the, you know, the existing advocacy program, is that we want people to know that just because they're vulnerable, they're not voiceless, right? And just because you are homebound doesn't mean that you are unable to engage in your community and have your voice heard, right? So I think that that's one thing that really sets our program apart. I would also say join the Caring Majority Coalition. So we are a part of that coalition, Searching Care, but they are really the group that is spearheading this initiative. So I would highly encourage you, at the very least, to just check them out on social media because they're a really amazing group. And they've been doing this for years and years. And it's a coalition of many different organizations, including directly impacted individuals. So there are older adults and people with disabilities that are a part of the movement, and really amazing people that have been doing this work for a long time. I believe including one of the activists that was a part of the CDPAP program and actually fought for that to become a program. I believe she is a part of the Caring Majority. And of course, educate yourself and others about the issue. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the primary reasons for me creating this was my recognition that many providers working with older adults in particular may not be aware of the gravity of the situation or how what's happening on the ground is really impacted on a macro level, right? The policies and practices that are going on. And as I mentioned earlier, social workers, including care managers, I did read the social work care manager code of ethics, which I learned about that there's a specific one that we have, I guess, an obligation to also engage in advocacy and social action when and if needed for the best interest of our clients and community members. Also, I would say encourage directly impacted individuals to publicly share their story. I think that that is one of the most impactful things that community members can do. And it could be a positive story, it could be a negative story, right? You can have clients share how much they really love their home care workers and how without them they wouldn't be able to thrive in the community. Or you can have, maybe a not so great story and them sharing, the struggles they've had with trying to secure home care. We know that unfortunately there's a lot of those stories. I would also share as providers working with older adults, I would obviously try to help the clients understand as well, when possible, how their situation is connected to the larger situation that's occurring, right? I think sometimes it can be challenging when you're in a rough spot to just be angry at the home care agency or even your social worker who's the person on the front line, but I think it's also part of our job to help guide them and help them understand the gravity of the situation, right? And you might be surprised that there are some clients that you may not have expected them to really understand the complexity of it, but with a little guidance they're amenable, right? And they're willing to share their story. And when I mean publicly share your story, it doesn't have to be with a news outlet or anything. It could just be on social media, right? The Caring Majority also has on their website a share your story area where you could submit your story there. And it's good because it's kind of like data collection. So once they collect all that data, they can share, right? We've had 3,000 community members in New York State share their struggles with getting home care. And that's something that can be brought, to legislators and show as concrete data that is happening. I also think that sharing your story is an incredible tool to change hearts, right? I think people forget when you're doing advocacy and organizing that we are working with a system, but the system is people, right? It's not just this obscure thing, right? There are people with emotions and hearts and feelings, right? So you have to appeal to those people's better interests, right? Their hearts. And I think the stories really can do that, right? And one of our clients, actually, Loretta Copeland, has been one of the if I see someone coming in, has been one of these individuals who have really taken it on her own, and spoken to news outlets and even spoke to the governor several times about her concerns with the issue. And as I was discussing before, I would say contact your state legislators and the governor. Previously, I was encouraging people to file complaints, but I found that not to be as effective as I would have previously thought, because it just becomes a recycled situation. The complaint just goes back to whatever government entity or Medicaid, MLTC, and then it just goes back to the care manager or social worker. So it just becomes cyclical. But in a way, it's almost like the entities that should be, making this change, just contributing to the cycle, right? So I found that not to be very helpful, but I would encourage you to contact the governor and your state legislators. Luckily, those that encompass the search and care area are very avid supporters of the Fair Pay for Home Care bill. So something that I have done actually is actually call them and thank them. And I remember when I called and thanked them, they were so confused. They were like, "Oh, you have nothing to complain about." But I think also calling your legislators and letting them know that they're doing the things that their constituents and community members want is a good thing, right? Because I think that they do generally just get calls when people are angry or mad or upset. But we also want them to know when they're doing the right thing, right? When they are supporting the things that the community members want. And I also had drafted this nice little letter with the Caring Majority. They had a template. So I just had a letter where I thanked them for being Fair Pay for Home Care supporters and shared who I was, Joseph from Search and Care, and just a nice little letter. And I just mailed it out to them. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. But I think things like that really do make an impact. So again, contacting your state legislators, you can call again, whether it's a happy thing to say or maybe a not so happy thing to say. They want and need to know what's going on in the communities. You can email them. There are specific people in their offices that do specific things. So when the budget was happening, I was communicating directly with their budget point people just to have them advocate that the Fair Pay for Home Care bill is fully included in the budget. Fortunately, as we saw, that didn't happen. We got a little bit of a watered down version. But obviously it had some impact because previously home care was not included in the budget at all, these increases. So the fact that it's even made it in has shown great strides. So I want you to understand that these little things together do make an impact. It's like moving one grain of sand, right? But if we're all moving one grain of sand, eventually you have a little mound. So that's the way I think of community organizing and advocacy. And I think it can be challenging at times for people who are engaged in direct practice, right? That work one-on-one with clients. It's a little easier to see progress when you're working on a micro scale. But I think it's people who are doing organizing and advocacy can not see the fruit of their labor often. But I think that it's always important to think that you're part of this larger movement, right? You're helping to move that one grain of sand. You may not see the end result for a while, but it's having an impact. Again, writing, like I said earlier, you can handwrite. I actually prefer handwriting just because everyone gets 10,000 emails and phone calls a day. When you snail mail something, it has a little bit more of an impact, right? They get it and it looks nice and it shows a little bit more intent there. And as I mentioned earlier, show your support on social media. I'm not really a social media person. I know I'm a bad millennial for saying that. But I have it. I just don't really post anything. But I decided to specifically make a Twitter for Fair Pay for Home Care because it seems like that's where the organizing is happening. It's a little scary. Sometimes Twitter knows about the news before the news knows. So that's really where things are happening at a fast pace. So what we were doing was really during the budget, we were tweeting at the governor and at the powers that be to include it in the budget. And that's a way to really get them at a expedited pace. covering this. And in person. I know that's a lot harder now with COVID. I haven't really engaged in too many in-person things, but that's another way to obviously make your voice heard. One of the strategies the Caring Majority did, which obviously worked because it put it on the governor's radar, was bird dogging, which essentially was showing up at anything that the governor was doing. If they learned that she was doing a press conference in Syracuse, right? They would have Syracuse members just show up there and, say like, do you support fair pay for home care? Kind of just like get them in the moment. And I think that strategy did work, right? Because it showed no matter where you're going, there are people that need home care, and there are community members that are watching and advocating for the issue. But at the end of the day, I wanted to share this as well, because besides all of the advocacy and the fair pay and all of that that's going on, I think there also just needs to be a culture change that happens in our society. And I really like this quote about home care. And it essentially, as you could see, says, the first step is seeing it not as valuable labor, but as labor in the first place. Many people don't see home care or caregiving as a respectable profession or job, right? I think because it's a feminized position, right? Just like any domestic labor, right? It's not really given value. And I think once we see it as a valuable part of society and our healthcare infrastructure, then we're really gonna have the changes that we need, right? And I mean, I'm sure all of you heard the governor talking about all the raises that were gonna happen for the healthcare industry and nurses and doctors, and you probably also heard about how doctors and nurses were these essential workers, but you did not hear the same rhetoric for home care workers, which were essential workers and are part of the healthcare infrastructure. So I think that it's also about a reframing about how we understand caregiving and how we understand home care. And I believe that is it. I put my sources. So with that being said, we have about like 15 minutes left. So let me stop sharing my screen and see if anybody has any questions. I know I shared a lot of information, but I felt it was really important to share the actual data, because when I saw the data, that's when I was like, whoa, like this is even worse than I thought it was. Marcy, you can unmute yourself if you want.
First of all, thank you, Joseph. This is great. And I think a much needed kind of putting it out there. A couple of things came to mind. One, which I've seen, I've heard this as an issue that comes up because many home care workers and I have a nursing home background, so even in nursing homes, the clients and the workers are from very often from very different cultures, very different backgrounds, and very different languages, and sometimes that can create an issue in terms of the care provision, let alone just, is the home care worker the right fit? And I mean, I think that says something about our society, that these jobs that are so vitally important are considered sort of the bottom of the rung. But sometimes the fact of the different socioeconomic groups that are getting involved can create some tensions in the care provision. I'm thinking also I realize that people could have come on to this presentation from any place probably that knew about it, but I'm thinking this is the kind of presentation that could be spoken up or spread the word to older adult centers, maybe community-based organizations, houses of worship, because I think this would be a valuable presentation course, that would make you even more tired than you might already be. To present this kind of presentation, because the notion of home care affects so many people. Again, sandwich generation, people, there are people who are caring for children as well. So I think that was something else that that came to mind. But I think your point about home care work being vital work. I used to say in the nursing home, all the nursing assistants should go on strike one day. And if they did, the facility would see who was doing the work. It's hard work. It's valuable work. It's something that can affect all of us. And I think, thank you for putting this out there. And I hope you can kind of put it out to an even wider bunch of people.
Thanks, Marcy. Brian?
I just wanted to, I was wondering, very interesting presentation. I was wondering if, I don't know if your studies necessarily, you had any understanding of this, but I was wondering if there are any models worldwide in home care that, are better than what we offer in the United States, that are a program where people that provide it are valued, and how do they structure it? I know, of course, they don't have the size economy that we do, but, or if, for that matter, statewide, if there's any statewide programs other than New York, where are there model programs where we might be able to see something that's working and bring it to our legislators? Because it is a crying shame. And what's sad about it is it's so perpetual. I remember over 20 years ago being a social worker in Mount Sinai and sending home people. And the same problems existed. The home care workers who did their very best and worked the hardest got paid woefully poor salaries. So I was wondering if or if anyone else on the call might know of programs that exist in publicly funded home care programs, either nationwide or internationally, that are noteworthy, that really, take the conversation a little bit broader at all.
I personally don't know of any. I would imagine there are. I would imagine probably in maybe Asian countries. I know Japan, for example, where a lot of their population are older. There's a different sense of caregiving in their communities. But I do also know there were studies in other states where they did increase the home care salaries, and the positive impact that it did have, reducing the turnover, reducing, expenditure costs for the turnover. But I don't know if there's a particular model out there that we could advocate for, but that's something good to look into.
Yeah. That's interesting. Thank you, Joseph.
Anybody else?
Joseph, I'm wondering, now that you are the chair of the Older Adults Committee, and, we seem to, because of COVID, we seem to be a little more activated. I wonder what we all can do to start to maybe bring about change. One of the things that popped into my head was that, when community health workers started to, come together and activate together, that role sort of got more legitimatized. And, I think that really is something that the profession of home health care needs to do a little more of. We can help, and anybody that works with older adults knows that this is an incredibly important, means for people that are homebound, and even people that aren't homebound, but that really need assistance, right? So I think, maybe we can all come together and start to do more as a group.
Yeah, I agree. And something I didn't share in this presentation, but I believe home care workers are either the fourth or fifth largest profession in East Harlem. So you can see how that also just has an impact on the entire community and the uh, economy of the community, right? Obviously, if there's a large portion of the community that are receiving low wages, they're not able to contribute to the local economy. So you see how that reverberates. And I believe specifically in New York City, I don't remember the exact statistic, but it was definitely over 70% were immigrant women of color. Um, and I believe New York City specifically has a disproportionate number of home care workers that are immigrants. I think across the nation, majority are women of color, but I think in particular in New York City, there's a large portion of them that are immigrants. So it's also, you know, it's not just a class issue, it's a women's issue, it's a racial justice issue, it's an immigration issue, right? It really spans across the different isms, right? I'll let Karen go and then Brian has another question.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. I mean, this was very informative, and I think just looking at the data, like comparing what the percentages and the data was like before COVID even started, like it shows a lot about, how many, not just our clients, but how many New Yorkers haven't been able to receive the services. And on top of that, also like the statistics can possibly show that, for instance, we have clients that want the services, but may refuse them or may not feel so comfortable because of vaccination policies, because of COVID just existing. And I think it helps me understand more of, like how you pointed out that our clients may be aware about the shortage. And, I have clients that in the beginning, it could have been very frustrating for them, but they've had the support of other family members and, explaining to them, breaking down, the barriers, the situation helps them understand why these things are happening. And, I think spreading the word out there, not just to like in a group, but I think overall, like having a workshop, I think as like an introduction to this topic would be very helpful. I think there's a lot of people that would benefit from participating because they do receive the services, but they may not know to the extent of how challenging this is. They may have home health aides that may come see them, and they're aware that their home health aides may be working with other people, but I think outside of that, they may not know what the other challenges are. So I think that would be really good to, not throwing this on you saying like it needs to happen right now, but I think having a workshop and introducing this to other clients that may not be in the advocacy group would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. And I think as much as we could educate and encourage older adults and community members, the better. I think also, you have to also come with the understanding that these are older adults, right? We're not dealing with infants, so they are aware and, have lived an entire lifetime, right? They're not, they're very much aware of adversity and likely have experienced different forms of adversity throughout their life. So this is not something that it would be totally unusual to them, right? They've lived through much more things than I have, right? But I think it's just helping them understand the context, and maybe encouraging them to use that context to make a change, right? Just imagine if every agency had this presentation and had their clients call their legislators. There would be no way that the legislators could ignore, right? I think the biggest thing is that I want people to know that this is an issue and it can't be ignored, right? I think the conversation that's happening with childcare is much more, there's much more publicity with that than there is with home care. But I think there's room for both. And I think we need to make it that this can't be ignored. This is a big issue, and the powers that be just can't ignore us anymore. So I think that's the point I wanted to get across. And Brian, I see you had a question. Or did he leave his hand up?
No, I'm sorry. I made a mistake.
Okay, that's fine. Does anybody else have a question, comment? Oh, there we go. We have somebody.
Hi, so I'm Zuli, and thank you for this amazing presentation. I got the wheels in my head turning, and thinking about it as like a human rights perspective and making an argument possibly for the least restricted alternative. And we know that most of our seniors, as they age, either they have family members that can take care of them, or they need to hire somebody else, or they have a home health attendant. But then what do we do from a human rights perspective, right? I'm trying to think of it in that way, and just being in the community, being able to surround yourself by the people that you know, the neighbors that you know, the environment that you lived for so long, making it that home health care be that least restricted alternative to going into a nursing home if possible. So again, you've got the wheels in my head turning, and I can see this going so many different ways, but I do believe that the number one thing, as mentioned by your topic, is increasing those wages for the people that are taking care of our seniors. It creates a better sense of appreciation, not only from your employee, but it also, when you are someone that has the financial means to take care of yourself, you're better able to take care of others. And that's how I see it as well. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, human rights framework generally, I don't know if you're a social worker or not, but it's embedded in our code of ethics, right? Our obligation for social justice and to advocate. And I'm not sure about other professions, but it really goes hand in hand, lockstep.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I see somebody, Craig, mentioned Republicans generally oppose any programs that might increase taxes on affluent folks. That's generally true, but surprisingly, with a lot of advocacy and education, this bill has a lot of bipartisan support. I think because of the understanding of the gravity of the issue and the idea that it will actually generate money for the economy. So it's almost like a no-brainer, right? Like it's only going to have, you know, generally positive impact. So you know, what is really the barrier? And I think the barrier is just more public awareness. If more people are aware that this is a vital issue, it'll make it to the front lines, right? Because there's so many issues that are happening, right? And all are important. But as you could see, you know, we get news about violence on the subway before we get news about home care workers and their wages. So I think it needs to come to a point where it's something that cannot be ignored anymore.
What
I
do
would
you,
also argue ageism.
Joseph, so you got this started. You gave us all the information and the data. What do you suggest as next steps? I think everyone here joined because, you know, they recognize that this is such an important role in their work with older adults, right? So let's take a step. Let's take a next step.
My thoughts would be, you know, if you have older community members that you think would be interested, have them join our advocacy program, you know, because then they'll be able to get the tools and support they need to advocate. I would also encourage people to join the Caring Majority, which is really the leading organization for all this. My other hope is that the East Harlem Community Health Committee formally takes this on as an issue, because I think besides it being a statewide issue, it certainly is a local issue as well, right? It impacts communities of color and East Harlem in particular, with the disproportionate number of home care workers in the community. If we wanted to make also a working group of professionals on this issue, we can do that. I mean, the caring majority does have professionals, but it is primarily driven by home care workers, people with disabilities, and older adults. So, you know, care receivers and caregivers, not as much professionals. But if we wanted to have a professionals contingency group, right, that really works on the issue and educates people, that's something that you know, that is on the table that can be done as well.
Joseph?
Mhm.
Joseph? Oh, I'm muted. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear your fire truck too.
Sorry, yeah, naturally. I was just gonna say that piggybacking on that, I would imagine on the Lower East Side, you would also, if you were to sort of reach out or something to maybe the Lower East Side Interagency Council or one of them in Chinatown, and a lot of organizations down there, I would imagine have a preponderance of home attendant and home care workers, Asian, all different people down there also. I remember there used to be the, you know, different home care agencies and things. So that might be another step or another approach somewhere you might want to take this a little bit.
Yeah, well, I believe a lot of the agencies in that area are part of the Caring Majority Coalition. But yeah, I mean,
So
to
joining with them maybe, or allying yourself with them, so you have like a larger portion of Manhattan to some extent. That might be helpful.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions or concerns? Nope. All right, well, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining and their great support for this issue that's deep, you know, I deeply care about. Yeah, so thank you everyone. And I put my email in the chat if anybody has any other questions or anything.
Thank you, Joey.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks.